What is up? What is up, Camelback fam? Welcome to another episode of Humble and Hungry, the series where we sit down with entrepreneurs who are building revolutionary ventures in education and technology. I am your host, Lex Lindsay, Senior Associate of Marketing and Communications at Camelback, and I am so excited to have joining me today Aimée Eubanks Davis, the founder and CEO of Braven and a 2015 Camelback Fellow.
One of the
Aimée, welcome.
originals.
Yes, an OG. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with me today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. I really think back to the founding of Braven, and there are just a few organizations and people that really were huge catalytic forces, and Aaron Walker and Camelback Ventures was one of them. So I'm excited to be here.
Yes. I'm super excited to jump into this convo. I think you might be the first 2015 Camelback Fellow we've actually had on Humble and Hungry. So just
Okay.
excited to talk more about your story, throw it back a little bit and talk about even, I know you guys are celebrating your 10-year anniversary.
Yeah.
So just all the growth that's happened over these years. So for those who are not familiar with you and the work that you're doing, I'd love if you could just, introduce yourself and share more about the work that you're leading with Braven.
Yeah, so again, my name is Aimée Eubanks Davis, and I got into the world of really thinking about students and how they go from college to career because I was a former sixth grade teacher, actually in New Orleans, Louisiana, where Camelback started. Yeah, I was a sixth grade teacher way before Katrina. I lived there for 7 years, continued to teach. I ran a nonprofit there, fell in love with that community as well as my students and their families, and had the good fortune of being able to watch lots of young people grow up. And at the same time that they were doing that, my career started to go into a new direction, which brought me back to Chicago, where I'm from, and on to the staff of Teach for America, which is how I started teaching in New Orleans to begin with. And basically, my first group of students happened to graduate from college the year of Hurricane Katrina. And so what's so interesting is that Katrina, as you well know, and Camelback, of course, knows, created quite the eye-opening moment for people to see the disparities when it comes to income in New Orleans, which anybody who lived there knew, but it was like a shocker for the rest of the world. And basically, I kept thinking, well, my former students, they should be okay income wise, as long as they don't go to work in New Orleans for a year because of the flood. But that said, what happened was I was watching them come out of school in Atlanta or Houston or here in Chicago and actually not land strong jobs, and it had nothing to do with Hurricane Katrina. So really it was a mixture of that and then my own personal upbringing here in Chicago, in amazing neighborhoods that are hardworking neighborhoods and happen to be Black and mainly low income, and watching my parents build a business where in basically a 10-year time frame between 4 and 14, my older sister and I really got to experience economic mobility. And so it's just never been lost on me that more income coming into a family actually does provide more opportunities. And so it was a mixture of those two experiences that led me to say there needs to be an organization that really helps young people go from their bachelor's degrees in college out into the labor market strong. And now we would say into a strong graduate school as well.
Amazing. So we're already kind of jumping into some of that backstory. Could you just speak a little bit more about the work that you do with Braven and what you guys are about?
Sure. So Braven is all about economic mobility. And how do you help a group of young people? It's about 1.3 million and growing young people who go to college every year, often on the Pell Grant or from low income families. How do you actually help them go out from that experience and earn an entire dollar instead of what is likely to happen, which is 66 cents on the dollar? And if they're Black and a woman, it's more like 50 cents on the dollar. And that scarring effect never goes away. And so basically, if you come out under earning your earning potential, you're very likely for that to be the history of your career, that one move, that one turn. And so basically what Braven does is we partner inside of higher educational institutions to run a credit-bearing course, 3 units of credit, that sophomores, juniors, or transfer junior students take. And they're put in a cohort of 5 to 8 with a leadership coach from the professional workforce. It can be a nonprofit, a for-profit, the government, who coaches a team of 5 to 8 through the Braven course experience. 80% of the content, interestingly enough, is actually online. So we have a huge technology platform. That said, the secret and the sauce is this coach cohort model, where it's a flipped classroom. So students do a lot of work online, but then when they hit their learning lab, which is really their lecture of 5 to 8, everybody presents their cover letter and they give each other feedback on it. And then their coaches are saying, here's how I think you've done well. Here's some improvements. And then they'll go back online to upload their cover letter for a grade. And it gets graded like any other course on a campus with teaching assistants in some cases, etc. After the course concludes, after that 15-week semester-long period, they then go into the post-course experience, which lasts typically for another 2.5 years, where we're using data between us and their schools to see, is the student on track, not on track, what more should we do? And if they aren't on track, we're very asset-based. We say, surprise, there's a professional mentor who wants to mentor you, that they're then offered. And if they are on track, then it's more like, oh, why don't you come out to this company to do, some kind of workplace event. So it's a lighter touch in that way. And so we are now at 9 schools. We're on our way into our 9th school partnership. One of our school partnerships is at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. Every single Spelman woman takes Braven during her sophomore year, which is incredible. But we're also at large state schools like Rutgers, Newark, San Jose State, here in Chicago, at Northern Illinois University, and at small schools like National Louis University that have large numbers of Black, Brown, and Pell eligible students.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I wish that this would have existed at the university that I was at. I went to Indiana University. I'm like, I needed this. I needed this. So it's just beautiful to know that it exists, and that so many students are just getting the opportunity to take part. I want to talk about, like I said, the venture has been around for 10 years, 10 plus years. And I would love, if you could just share some of the challenges that you have faced along this journey and how you've overcome. I know a lot of folks who are, they're in it, they're in the trenches right now, and probably looking to you as like a success story and inspiration.
Yeah. So, the story that I will talk about first, because I think it's so quintessential to why Camelback is so important, is that I had quite a career at Teach for America, 13 years on the senior team. By the time I left, I was overseeing people work, diversity, inclusion work, and public affairs, so communications and marketing, etc. And when I really started to say, I think there's this missing piece in this whole educational journey that all of us K-12 people had said, climb the mountain to college, and that's the way it's going to happen. And then all of a sudden, there's a cliff on the back end. I had a really hard time raising money. And it was fascinating because I knew actually a lot of donors from Teach for America, who were on the board of Teach for America, who had just gotten to know me because I was a senior team member there, who told me no, they would not actually invest in Braven. And I was like, well, if they won't invest in me, like, I don't know who they would invest in who happens to be a person of color, mainly because I had had such a track record at an organization that was started by a white woman. And I helped to get more diverse, et cetera. But where I was like, how is it possible that there is actually a track record of success of doing something actually very similar to, I would argue, what we did on the staff at Teach for America when we were doing leadership development of early stage talent. And so that was the biggest hurdle initially. And that's why Camelback is so near and dear to my heart, is that Camelback literally probably came in as the 3rd donor to Braven. And Aaron Walker, I think, just knew, like, that's why Camelback needed to exist, because it needed to be a friends and family round for early stage ideas. But I always think that it helped give us also a notch of credibility as well. So I always feel like Braven and Camelback kind of started together, and Aaron and my personal frustration at what we thought was just so deeply unfair about who got to get funding and who didn't, simply based on truly on race.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you kind of naming that, because we hear often, funding is the hardest part, especially when you are a BIPOC or woman founder. Mm-hmm. And I would love, or if you have advice for entrepreneurs out there who are sharing in that struggle, who are in the trenches, just like, how do I make this happen? I need funding for my venture to keep going. If you have any words of advice or wisdom that you could share with those folks.
Yeah, I think the first piece of advice I would give is like, don't stop. I mean, it's so easy to get so deeply discouraged and be like, forget it. But just really try to keep persevering. This first piece of advice. Second, I would say one thing that started to really help me was actually white allies. So Wendy Kopp, who started Teach for America, started to pick up the phone and say, seriously, I do not understand. How is it possible? It's a great idea. It's really needed. She has a successful track record, etc. And as annoying as that might be, I get it. It was important. And I will say to this day in the world of Braven, I've really understood the importance of having a diverse team around the organization. So the team of Braven, just go on our website, you can see it's beautifully diverse. It is filled with people who share the backgrounds of our fellows, top, bottom, all throughout the organization. And also so is our board. Our board is very diverse too. But it shouldn't be overlooked that there's still people who identify as white and come from privileged backgrounds who also want to see this country be the place where the American dream can be real in all ways, shapes, and forms, including if you want to start a successful nonprofit or impact venture. So that's the second thing I'd say is like really make sure you think about the broad set of a kitchen cabinet of advisors and people who don't necessarily look like you, but also who maybe know other things that you do not know. Nonprofits are businesses. They're just on a different tax code. They're still businesses. And so that's the other thing I did was really look for people who had built not only successful nonprofits, but successful businesses. And then the final thing I would say is you just cannot underestimate the power of the team. I always say I am a co-founder of Braven with a bunch of other people. Like basically, it is the talent that has come to work at Braven that has helped us build this organization to what it is now. And because we got started and we were actually doing some pilots to begin with, et cetera, that ended up going away. Or even when I think about our core values that we had to like breathe life into, I often like to share with people the stories of like when I got voted down on like shrinking our core values. Cause I was like, no, these are great. They're like 10 lines long each. They're fine. And the person who was heading our product team at the time, Gina Kim, was like, they are just not. They need to be snappy. They need to be punchy. They need to be this, that, and the other. And she won, and she was right. So the power of the team is the final thing that I would say as well.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing all of those, because I was just having a conversation with another fellow and we were talking about this piece of like allyship and having champions in your corner who may not necessarily look like you, but can help shepherd you or, like bring you into spaces that you typically might not be able to get into on your own, and just how important and vital it is, even for funders going out of their way to become those shepherds and allies in the work. Like,
that's right.
It's kind of like the two sides of I shouldn't always have to go out and search for them. Like, come to me, be a helping hand in this, a partner in this.
But it's the knowledge capital. I think a lot of times there's a big focus, don't get me wrong, and there should be, on the financial capital. But when you really study businesses that start to take off in the nonprofit world or in the for-profit world, almost always it's actually not only about the money, but it's actually about the knowledge capital that comes in alongside those entrepreneurs and those entrepreneurial teams that start giving advice and helping point people in different directions. And I will say that was, you asked me first, like, what were some of the challenges? One was just straight up getting money. But two, then I started to realize, I don't have the board. I don't have the knowledge capital at Braven that these other organizations have. How do I acquire that? Because again, it wasn't like people were going to look at me necessarily like they might look at their daughter or son or, niece, nephew, et cetera. And so that was another big barrier, was like, how do I get the right group of people on the board as well who are my advisors beyond the financial capital? And the final thing I would say was hard, but we figured it out, was how to build a sustainable business model, like something that really was going to have legs to it and be able to endure and grow and scale over time.
Yes. It's funny enough, I'm here at our closing week, the end of our fellowship, and that's what we've been talking a lot about, is just like sustainability. How do we keep the ventures going after you've come through this experience with the fellowship, and just thinking about what does the future hold. So I appreciate you for sharing and naming that as well. Speaking of the fellowship, since you are an OG Camelback member, could you share with folks just how the fellowship played a role in Braven's growth and your growth as a leader.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned this earlier. I mean, one, it was the third funder to Braven. Camelback was, and Aaron was. Two, I do think Aaron and I knew that we wanted to see something very different for people who came after us. And so we were definitely very aligned on like why Camelback needed to exist. And of course, he was very convinced that Braven needed to exist. And I think it was not lost on me that, you know, I came out of that very first group, how important it was for Braven to be successful, for Camelback to continue to be successful. Like it was very mutually exclusive, like intertwined. So it was not mutually exclusive. We actually needed both organizations to do well. And so I always felt a good pressure, like no bad pressure, but a good pressure to make sure that in that first cohort, at least Braven and hopefully others, were going to be high performing to prove the Camelback model really was necessary. The other thing that I would say that Aaron really did, and you know, the team at Camelback was like one or two people at the time. There's always great thought partners where it was like, so seriously, what do you think? If we did this, do you think that would work? Oh my goodness, what about this? And then in that early cohort were some people who were on the technology side of the house, definitely on the education side of the house, which was always great. Just having those other free-flowing thoughts going across a really diverse portfolio when it came to the kinds of ventures that people were working on was just super, super helpful as well. And then Aaron, without a doubt, introduced us over time. I mean, even recently introduced us to a person who's now one of our donor partners. And so it's just been a beautiful decade of just how Camelback has really helped Braven accelerate, and hopefully Braven has been able to do that a bit for Camelback as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I love just to hear it's like Braven and Camelback growing together, because we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary in a couple of years, and it's like, oh man, that's two organizations starting from the very beginning, supporting one another, and still, you know, 10 years later, we see like still existing, still doing the work and seeing great success. So that's just amazing to hear.
No, Aaron comes into my office at Teach for America saying, I think I'm going to start this thing. And this is before like Braven was kind of going, because it was like a side project I had for like 18 months at DFA. And I was like, oh my gosh, this has got to get going. This has got to get going. And so it's just so fun to know that Camelback is on its way to 10 years. It's just amazing. And so needed then, needed now.
Right. So I want to talk about legacy. I mean, 10 years, 10 plus years of doing this work. And what legacy are you hoping that Braven leaves behind, you know, over the next 10 years and even beyond that?
So this is a great question, because one of my very favorite pictures of me is actually at a Camelback summit, where I'm facing the audience, so you can't see my face, but you see the back of my shirt and it says "Live Your Legacy," and that's one of the 5 Braven core values. And so it's just so funny, because whenever I see that picture, I'm like, that is a great picture. Like it's like all the right things. Like it's Camelback, it's Braven, it's Live Your Legacy. You know, it's not, you know, the front of me. It's, you know, like, because, you know, I'm, you know, like most people where you're like, I don't know if I really, that hair was out of place. Like none of that, right? None of it. More so like the imagery of that picture, I think, is what I always come back to in terms of the power of it. And so when I think about legacy of myself, and honestly now an organization, it has everything to do with Braven has proven over 10 years that it's completely possible to have Black women, men, brown women, men, etc., come out of higher ed and earn an entire dollar instead of 66 cents on the dollar. We have been anywhere between 14 and 22 percentage points above the national average for our students doing that, depending on what's going on in the country. That means that the vast majority of our students are gainfully employed, and not just in I can support myself and maybe a bit of a family, but upwardly and economically mobile. And so 90% of our students are employed. And that's amazing. So there are very few who are not employed. Some of them are in part quality jobs. So we're always like, how do we get you to a full quality job? It's that full quality job we need to get you to. And 75% of our students out earn their parents in terms of where their parents were at the exact same moment in life. And that's just huge. I mean, that's called breaking the economic sound barrier in 5 semesters. That's what it means to be on, quote unquote, the path to the American dream. And so we've totally proven the possible. We have completely proven that it is possible for a group of people to still be on track to the American dream. And so we've done that with 7,400 students. By 2026, we'll do that with 15,000 students. We want to get upwards to the floor of 40,000 students. And by the time we hit that, we will be serving 10% of the minority serving institutions in this country. And honestly, we want to get to 80 to 100,000 young people in the next 10 years or so, for 20 to 25% uplift in terms of their economics and their economic health over time. And that's $15 to $20 billion of lifetime earnings for our students, their families, their communities, and the country. It is nothing but good for the country to have Black and Brown Americans earning at their full economic power. And honestly, in terms of leadership, like, the country is growing more diverse. We have to have more diverse leaders in all types of places, and America will be just fine. But we do need to make sure that there is a pipeline to leadership. And so I just love that we're able to do that, that every single Spelman woman is in the Braven experience. We're on our way into a huge partnership with Delaware State in January, where every single one of their sophomores, except for those who are in their nursing program and aviation programs that actually usually have a pathway directly out, will be in Braven. Every single student at Rutgers, Newark, who's a sophomore, will have to opt out of Braven come next year. And we are talking to so many more school partners. It's just sort of wild to me because this credit bearing model is very tricky inside of higher ed, as is getting all these employer partners as well. For every 1,000 students in the model, there's 17,000 volunteer hours that come in. And so we've built quite a machine on the higher ed side and on the employer partner end, which has really created this bridge between the two that didn't exist. And so that's what I'm super excited about in terms of legacy building. It's like breathing life into something that didn't exist, a market that didn't exist, and then watching a group of students not only flourish for themselves and their families and their communities, but for the country.
Oh my gosh. I was getting like just chills listening to you talk about like the impact that you've had so far, and then where you see this going in just the next 2 years, and thinking of even bigger of like the impact that it's going to have on not just like the students' lives and their families' lives, but the community and the country overall. And thinking about just generations from now, what that means, being able to get Black and Brown students to a place of economic mobility, and what that means for their families, and what it means for so many legacies in the future is so huge. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to just dream of. I love it. So I want to, as we've gone to the past and thought about, the work that you're doing, and then this future that you're hoping to create, thinking about those things, how would you describe entrepreneurship and what it means to you?
Yeah. So first of all, I was an accidental entrepreneur. I did not mean to start an organization. I really think I thought I would have just continued on at Teach for America and probably just stayed there for the rest of my career. I loved the work that I was doing there. That organization meant a lot to me in my career and is hugely impactful for students and families, et cetera. So the first thing I would say is, often I think people believe that you have to have been like born an entrepreneur, just that you have to have the like Wendy Kopp who started Teach for America. It was her senior thesis at Princeton, or Mark Zuckerberg in his dorm room at Harvard, where he really wasn't clearly going to school. He was like building a company, right? I think that's the story we often see of entrepreneurs. We don't usually see that Julia Childs didn't even start becoming an entrepreneur until she was like well into her 40s. I think people think that there's this like type of person. And I always think of myself as like very not that. I had been in places for long periods in time. So you heard me say I lived in New Orleans for 7 years. I taught. I ran a community-based organization there for 5 years. I then was on the senior team of Teach for America for 13 years. I spent a lot of time in other places, and how I identified the Braven problem was 8 years of running the human assets team at Teach for America. We had 50,000 young people applying every year to the teaching corps, another 30,000 people applying to our staff. You start getting an enormous amount of data recognition that first-gen Pell eligible Black and Brown students are not actually faring as strong in your application process. And then you start seeing your former students at the same time. All of a sudden you realize that there's a problem to be fixed, versus saying, oh, I have to figure out a problem to fix, if that makes sense. So I don't know. I just think that sometimes people can be accidental entrepreneurs. Some people start out like Wendy and Mark Zuckerberg, where they just, are born that or whatever. So it's like the born or made debate. But ultimately, what I'd say entrepreneurship is about is how do you identify a problem, truly develop a solution that has a business model around it that can be sustained. And honestly, whether it's on the for-profit side or the nonprofit side, that creates impact that leaves the world a better place. But that does take a lot of not just courage and all the things, but just stamina. I mean, it's just not easy. And it's just not easy to build these things. And the amount of work that it takes and risk and all that is real.
Sorry. Thank you so much for sharing that, because as I said, I'm here at closing week for our current cohort, and just thinking about, like, it is really, really hard. And this idea that we have of what an entrepreneur is. Mm-hmm. We've been running this entrepreneurship. The reason I asked that question is because we've been doing this entrepreneurship is campaign, and it's really highlighting the stories of Camelback Fellows who are redefining what entrepreneurship is. And it's not this status quo, what we imagine the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Jeff Bezos of the world. It's folks like you who are out here identifying a problem that can change, and in creating solutions that can change the world, and not just, here to make money or whatever, but real impact. So thank you so much for just sharing. It's not all about the folks that we think it is. It could be an everyday person.
Yes, for sure. I mean, people awesome. Who are closest to the problem. I mean, there are moments where people are like, I'm like, well, my own life story, the students, I then worked in people work for a long time. Like, it shouldn't be that shocking. That's why, again, when there were donors who just were fence sitting, it was puzzling, because it's like, I actually do understand this problem very well. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So as we're kind of winding down here, I would love to just hear what's on the horizon. We're coming up on the end of 2023. So what's on the horizon for 2024 and the next 10 years of Braven?
Yeah. So we're in the middle of a growth plan and a growth campaign. And so hopefully this is inspirational to people. But Braven, we are on track to raising $100 million, which is incredible. We're like 69 million, I think it is, or somewhere close to that and we will figure out the last 30 million on purpose in order to grow and expand into more HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions, because it costs us $3,000 a fellow for the 3-year experience. And those schools only pick up a sixth of it because they do not have the resources. And so we have to have a model that has a strong funding model that's mainly on our corporate side, but then also with donor partners. And that said, it's never lost on me, because I've seen enough in the nonprofit world to know it's super rare when someone has a shot who looks like me and looks like the folks in the Camelback portfolio, or as a woman, to being able to be on that kind of a raise and actually will accomplish it. And so that's one thing that I'm super excited about, is just really proving what is possible again. Because I know if Braven succeeds and Camelback succeeds, then the entrepreneurs that will come through Camelback will succeed over time, because you just start helping people right size the risk that they might place on a Black or brown or a woman entrepreneur. So that's super exciting. But then I said it before, just our ability to scale our numbers, the HBCU partnerships that we're looking at, the Hispanic serving institution partnerships that we're looking at, it just gives me goosebumps, where I'm like, at moments where I'm like, people, we will be as large as like the Ohio State, when you think about like talent under management, honestly, and being able to really think through the final piece, which is, now that we have Braven fellows who are well out into the world of work, literally who came in as a transfer student like Dylan Bramble Brown to Rutgers Newark, nearly dropped out of college, comes into Braven, is like, I don't know what I want to do, but maybe I want to be a lawyer. I'm from an immigrant family. I've always helped my parents with their legal paperwork, etc. We say, okay, where are you thinking about going? He gives us some schools. We're like, those are fine schools, but have you thought about some other schools? He goes to Georgetown University. This is in 2018. He's now a 3rd-year associate at Latham Watkins in New York City, out earning both of his parents times a lot. And we're seeing that with so many of our students. whether they decide to go into a career in law and honestly a big for-profit like that, or they're deciding to leave lives of impact. Like we have another fellow, Musab, who is now on the school board, the youngest elected official in Jersey City. We now have a woman who is now like the VP of like COO operations at Barclay. Like you're just sort of like watching these people, and it is in a very short period of time. And I just think, I always believe that we wanted to build the pipeline of promise of 100,000 students that was actually larger than the 90,000 students who we must focus on, who are in the school to prison pipeline. But you have to have that counter narrative. You have to have that counter narrative of the pipeline of promise. And so I just really think in the next, couple years on the way into the future, we're going to build a stadium, which is what I always wanted, of students who are showing what's possible and reaching their wildest dreams of success when it comes to what they want to do with their lives after college.
Oh my gosh. Aimée, I'm so excited because I know that it's going to happen. I know that you're going to hit that 100 million. I know that we're going to have that stadium of students. Like, when that moment comes, I'll be wherever I am in the world just celebrating you.
Well, and it was Camelback was one of our very first believers.
Yes. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here today, to share your story, to share such inspiration and advice for folks who, may just be getting started in their entrepreneurial journey, or just like really in the trenches. I hope that you guys definitely took some notes, go back and rewatch this and get some inspiration. Before we close out fully, I do have two last questions.
Sure.
You sound very, very busy. I can imagine that raising $100 million is not easy, and it takes a lot of time. And so in this work, how do you prioritize or practice self-care to just keep yourself in there, keep yourself in the game?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I am busy, yes, and I always say I'm always here for Camelback Fellows. If for some reason there's something in Braven or somehow that you think that we've built our business, or if I can be helpful, I always say go look at our donor list. I'm always an honest broker about, this person might be interested in that, this person might not. Let me see if they're interested in talking to you or not. But I am absolutely here as a resource to the community. I want people to know that. And when it comes to like my own like well-being and all that, I am one of these interesting people who've never known ever a day of feeling like I went to work. I got lucky when I did Teach for America and became a teacher. And then even as I became, a leader of a nonprofit, and then on the staff of Teach for America, I've just always loved my work. So I like to say to people, I work really hard. I family really hard because I have 3 kids and a husband. So on the weekends, and people at Braven hear me say all the time, it used to be back in the day, I was cool with weekend work, and I will be once these children are off in college and on with their lives. But right now, like, I will work ridiculously hard during the week, but on the weekend, I really want to focus on my 3 kids and being with them. And I'm there during the week too, but even tonight, I won't roll in the door till like 9:30 at night. So that said, and then I vacation really hard. So like 3 times a year, 4 times a year or so, my husband and I with our kids, and sometimes we try to go without the kids. That's a piece of advice for anybody who happens to have children in their lives, that we just go away and we really do unplug and just get some time to rest and recharge. But unfortunately, I'm not like, super into something else. I almost view work as my just calling, but also like a hobby. Like I just love it that much. It's like hard not to be excited to do what we do every day. To make an impact on the world.
No, that's awesome. And such like truly a blessing, because not many people get the opportunity or have the chance to say that, like, what I do for work is what I love. And so it's not really work. It's just my calling and my fun. So that is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing those with us. As we wrap up, if folks want to learn more about you, if they want to learn more about Braven, if they want to connect to talk entrepreneurship, how can people connect with you, Aimée?
Yeah, sure. So the Braven website is a great place to go and just look at the story of Braven. It's actually pretty well documented on the website. And then, of course, if you Google me or Braven, like, you can watch some, like, whether it's TED Talk type stuff or just other talks that I've given, etc. So that's a good way. LinkedIn is, of course, a good way to reach out. I do get a lot of LinkedIn requests, so just don't be mad if it takes a moment to get back to them. But otherwise, if you're in the Camelback family, Camelback knows how to get to me. So, I just feel like in this community, I'm very accessible. So I hope people, again, if I can be helpful, and I always said this to Aaron too, if I can come in and do some kind of a session and what did I learn about like knowledge capital, or what did I learn about actually that it's a business and it's got to have a business plan attached to it, and how's revenue going to come in, etc. I'm always willing to do that.
Awesome. I went ahead and dropped the link to Braven on the screen, y'all. So that's where you can go to learn more about Braven. And thank you for offering yourself as a resource for our Camelback Fellows. I'll be sure to communicate that to all of them as well. Aimée, thank you so much again, just for being here with us and sharing all of these gems. We really appreciate you and love having you a part of the Camelback fam, and just super proud of all the work that you've been doing and the achievements that you've had, and excited to see what you accomplish next.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It felt like, being home at the reunion, Cam fam, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you reaching out. And I hope the rest of the time with this group goes well.
Thank you. To everybody tuning in, thank you guys for being here. As you know, we have these conversations twice a month, so be on the lookout for our next guest. Until then, be well, and we'll catch you next time.